We see this girl who made her way through a field of skeletons, fought off some bats, all in order to enter this castle. The reason she's here is to gain knowledge so she can
Why
become
is
a
it
doctor.
that God
First
feels
thing
that it is
came to
necessary
mind
to
is how
test
her
my
survival
patience
instincts
every
are
time I
enhanced
turn a
with the
corner? Greetings, my Cherryful Chariots, and if you haven't seen my blog post the other day, you would know that today's subject is about a video that I saw on my algorithm titled Castlevania is a Masterpiece by I'm Kevin. From my understanding, he seems to cover animation or animated-related content in a way that is comical to many. I won't deny that his editing style is very unique to himself, and it's very comical. However, I'll mainly be speaking about this video itself and what he says within it, and some of the things that he covers within the video as a whole. Now, I don't expect him to be the most knowledgeable when it comes to the Castlevania series, as he has never really touched Castlevania up to this point. And I don't really expect his audience to either understand that either, considering that the only comments that I found in his comment section were related to how good the anime is. And if you're in depth into the Castlevania series as much as I am, you would understand that although the Castlevania animated series has some nice blemishes, that being the fight scenes, some of the witty banter, and the animation style. However, besides that, that is the only good commentary that I see from a lot of the comments in his comment section. That being aside, allow me to preface what this video will entail exactly. Considering that his video mostly is just recapping the plot synopsis of Castlevania Seasons 1 and 2, I wonder why, I will only be going over some of the things that I think are of interest or need to be explained, either because of something that he made a comment about, or something that the show already said that he's repeating. I don't feel like I need to explain this rule lastly, but do not engage negatively with this content creator or the people that support him. It's not a good look for anyone involved. So frankly, I don't want literary bloodshed spilled under my name and my banner, all for the sole reason that I disagree with what the YouTuber understands of the franchise, or the animated series rather, and his opinions of said animated series. However, with that being said though, let's get into the issues.
He kinda liked her vibe, so he showed her what she wanted to see. Science.
Wow, the first problem 2 minutes in. This is gonna be a great video, isn't it? So, let's get started with number 1. Dracula is not a scientist, at least in the manner that the show portrays him to be. There is not a single Castlevania game, aside from cases like Castlevania 64 and Lament of Innocence to some degree, that depicts Dracula to be a scientific genius that invents sciences and inventions before anyone else. Although that we know that Matthias may have been an alchemist during the events of Lament of Innocence, or prior to it, we do not know to what extent or what he used his alchemy for. We only know this because of Ronaldo Gandolfi and his dialogue with Leon in the game, who was family friends with the Kronqvists. If one is to argue that Matthias created the Crimson Stone, that would be false, since the lore explicitly states and implies that he had found the stone, similar to how Walter had found the Ebony Stone. If one were to argue that since his castle has clock rooms in it, or clock towers rather, as proof of his scientific mind, keep this in note, clock towers existed prior to his ascension to being Dracula, as well as the fact that the castle's will conjures the rooms, hence its constantly changing state upon its resurrection. Because remember, in the Castlevania series, the castle is just that, a castle. Even though, in the game franchise, it is supposed to be a living entity that is controlled with the powers of chaos. But you know what? What do I fucking know, right? And for a guy who's supposedly scientifically minded, he also never has used his inventions at any point throughout the series aside from what he was using to teleport the castle to a specific random location. Which goes to show that the show writers wanted to make Dracula a scientist until they magically decided to drop the idea as soon as this episode ended. So there's that. Also, if anyone is gonna argue that Dracula is a scientist because he studied alchemy when he was Matthias Kronqvist, keep in mind The show likes to separate itself from the timeline, yet also decides to use lore bits from the actual games to explain plot holes that the show never properly explains, nor does it even bother to try to, which we'll get to later on. However, keep in mind, alchemy in the Castlevania series is kind of infused with magical practices. So yes, there is some science to it, however it's more mystical and spellcrafty than it is based on an actual science, like chemistry. And how would I know this exactly? Well, the only other alchemist that I can name to you is Rinaldo Gandolfi, and we'd never seen him do anything alchemical in the entirety of Lament of Innocence. The only thing close to it would be when he enhanced Leon's gauntlet to be able to perfectly parry enemies. And I don't know about you, but chances are you are not going to be able to do this in the real world. Only if you so happen to know magic. So I will say this again. The show depicts Dracula to be an inventor and a scientist at the very start. Even though this plot point is never brought up again after this, and it is never anything substantial in the actual source material that this show is supposedly based on.
When they came through, Jennifer walled them off with ice. We're so lucky they're stupid because they must have forgot they had wings. This one just ran into the pikes.
You're honestly an idiot. I don't know what's wrong with you.
Now, this is going to cover a large majority of seasons 1 and 2, so be prepared. Where, how, and why did Trevor get his scar? How did Alucard get under the town of Greshit? How does Dracula know who Trevor is if no Belmont before him has supposedly met? Why is Godbrand the only vampire aside from Carmilla to receive characterization, just to die later before the heroes even show up? Why do the flying demons forget how to fly when surrounded by an ice wall with no roof? Why specifically is Leon Belmont the first Belmont? Why is every clergy character portrayed as duplicitous, stupid, evil, or all of the above? The church was the ones who sent Trevor and Cypher to deal with Dracula in the original series. Why is it that now they are portrayed as zealots and anti-science freakazoids? Most of these could be explained with game lore. However, fans of the series claim that the show and games are different. Therefore, the show then immediately makes less sense because now we can't use the games to explain any of the plot holes that this series introduces. Now, speaking of problem 3, the show banks on the game series lore to explain contrived and poorly explained plot and character details, yet at the same time we are expected to believe that it doesn't. I swear you couldn't make less sense if you tried.
The leader of this world, and Hector has no choice but to obey. Put a collar on his neck and started beating him crazy. She needs to be put down expeditiously.
It is so clearly obvious that out of all the characters in the original animated series that got done the worst was probably Hector, and I have no idea why. How is it that you are going to betray Dracula, the man that not only did you swear your loyalty to, because, you know, it's a feeble argument at best, but how are you then convinced by a woman you have just met, who you understand is a vampire, and you also have the preconceived knowledge that vampires have a tendency to lie? And the only reason why you believed in Dracula to begin with was because he had found you at a worse spot than you were now, during a time when Dracula still had his wife going for him. So why on earth would you even entertain the idea of betraying Dracula for a woman you just met who, from all intents and purposes thus far, has acted like a total asshole? No, and then keep in mind, throughout the fucking series, Carmilla is just the bitchiest misandrist I have ever seen in a show to date. And that is saying something, considering that throughout the last decade or so, we have had tons of female characters constantly preach about how much better they are than men, and constantly allude to the fact that they constantly preach that women can do everything a man can do, yet verbatim under the same breath constantly argue with men that women are stronger and better in every fucking way. I swear to God, this entire animated series is a fucking parody.
Now earlier, the speakers were talking about a story of a hero who slept beneath the city, the one who will stop Dracula, but Trevor immediately saw that this so-called hero is a vampire.
Not a vampire. A human plus a vampire does not equal vampire. It equals something called a Dhampir. Now, I know this sounds pedantic of me, however this is going to feed into a reason that will come later on.
All of a sudden, Alucard can turn into a wolf? Huh? I don't know what purpose this form serves. Is that for shock factor?
Oh, I can't wait to eventually get to this reason. But the reason why Alucard can turn into a wolf is because that was one of his abilities in Symphony of the Night. Hence a reference that nobody who played the games understood.
Alucard told us about how Dracula is a man of science. He has the knowledge that their society has forgotten ages ago.
Again, hopping back to reason 1, Dracula is not a scientist, and not in the way everyone is treating him to be. And you have got to love any scientific advancement made by either the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, and undercut it by saying that, oh, it was Dracula who actually learned all this shit, and it was that Europeans learned all of this ages ago, but they magically disappeared when the fucking church decided to do church things and fucking persecute people for having a fucking brain. Even though things like alchemy, universities, and hospitals all started because of the church. So yes, let's just portray the church as incompetent assholes that don't know anything about science and constantly persecute people who even have a moniker of thought. Thank you, Adi Shankar and the other executive producers, for not only making the Catholic Church a 180 of what it's supposed to be in the original series. You know, it's funny, because you don't see this sort of negative media representation with either the Jews or Muslims. I wonder why that is.
Took him off the streets but caught him snooping through his book, so he asked him why. So I can help you. Oh. Why?
Because I love you, huh?
Pause.
What?
Don't you ever in your life say some shit like that to me again. But I love you too.
Huh?
Nah, I understand why this dude became evil. I'd be damned if I'm trying to help someone and I get beat for it. I don't blame Isaac for what he did. Deserved, honestly. So I guess that's why he whips himself now, to remind him of his hatred or something.
Again, I understand that the Europeans did slavery, and we all understand that them doing it was a bad practice. However, this is going to feed into what I said prior about how you see Christians depicted in these scenarios, yet other occupants of this same slave trade are never depicted. Again, I wonder why that is. You know what? Fuck it. Let's make this reason 5. There is no duality of good or evil amongst the religious characters within Castlevania the Animated Series. The closest religious figure that we actually got to being somewhat good was the judge. However, if you all saw Season 3's ending, you would know that that ending ruined his entire character within the span of just a few minutes. Because of course, we can't have a single good Christian character who is depicted as being just that, good. They have to be corrupted or have to be incompetent in some way or manner. The only time where I've seen something like this work is in, believe it or not, Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, with the character of Claude Frollo, otherwise known as Judge Frollo. See, the thing about Frollo in the Hunchback of Notre Dame is that the main thing that compels him to do the things that he does is his twisted sense of, I guess, righteousness or holy divinity. And on top of that, he is also seen constantly throughout the movie to be plagued by a great sin. And that sin is lust for Esmeralda. Then we have an archdeacon who, although is of the same religion as Frollo, he is completely polar opposites to him as a character. Because you get to see the good and the bad that is being portrayed in the movie. However, we can clearly see the message that we are supposed to be taking from this movie, and that Frollo, despite being of the same religion as the Archdeacon, is completely and utterly diabolical in comparison. and we shouldn't be rooting for him. He uses the cover of religion to excuse the killing of Quasimodo's mother and his attempted murder of Quasimodo and Esmeralda later down in the movie. Meanwhile, the Archdeacon tried to protect Esmeralda from Frollo because he understood that what he was doing was wrong. Now compare and contrast that dynamic with what we have going in the Castlevania animated series, and you virtually have nothing of that sort. Every fucking character who works at the fucking church or is of a religious authority is an ass, a dick, a fucking duplicitous scumbag, or an incompetent flea man who takes what they are told at face value and doesn't even bother questioning their actions. It's like the writers asked r/atheist what they thought a fucking Christian was. It is almost comically moronic.
But Trevor doesn't know that part of the story. All he sees is a vampire.
I don't like your tone, Belmont.
Okay, I'm not gonna number this one, but how does Alucard know who the Belmonts are? Like, I get it. In this timeline, supposedly, the Belmonts hunted creatures of the night. Supposedly started with Leon. And creatures of the night include vampires, so that checks out. However, why would Alucard know of the Belmonts if A, he never had to worry about them because Dracula wasn't going on a rampage? Secondly, when did he learn about the Belmonts, and from who? Because I doubt Dracula or even Lisa would even mention the Belmonts considering how little relevance it probably had to their lives. So again, where, when, and why did Alucard learn about the Belmonts? I'm genuinely curious about this. But no, like with every other question this series poses, it never gets fucking answered. The only way I can possibly see Alucard learning about the Belmonts is if either A, as soon as Dracula's rampage started, a year before the whole Targovishta incident, he tried to research any possible vampire hunters who may be of help to him in case his father, goes fucking apeshit, in which he did. Or, second option, after he had his shit kicked in by his own father, he had to research who the hell Belmonts were before he went on his little, I guess, rest. Keep in mind, the problem isn't the fact that the show wants you to speculate. The problem is that it asks so many fucking questions and never answers them. This just so happens to be one of them. But unfortunately, we are not done with, reasons, because why aren't we? You can consider these next reasons bonus reasons, as these weren't necessarily things about the video in question itself, but more so about the anime in general and stuff that happens outside of the coverage that he offered. Unclear who the audience is supposed to be. If the purpose was to make a show for people who have never played the games, like Mr. I'm Kevin over here, why include random game Easter eggs, references, and plot details that only fans of the OG series would understand? And if the show was to target the OG fans, why do such a disservice to the characters, places, story, and overall atmosphere that drew in the original fans to begin with? The Castlevania animated series, as well as Nocturne, because why the fuck isn't it? They're constantly hailed as the best video game adaptations to date, and frankly, I do not see why, considering that both animated series fail in so many ways to capture what made the original Castlevania franchise spark to so many people, including myself. I don't see the logic in it. Why change the very identity of what made the franchise appeal to so many people beforehand? Sure, if you compare it to other Konami franchises like Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid, it's pretty niche nowadays. But it's because it was one of the old vanguards of what made Konami Konami. Without successes like Castlevania, we probably wouldn't have these franchises that I just mentioned. So I don't see the logic behind the writers or the producers thinking that they know better than the original people who made the franchise. It's so absurd. And Castlevania isn't the only franchise to do this. Devil May Cry, which conveniently was also spearheaded by Adi Shankar, the Halo series, the Witcher series later down the road, and infamously currently, The Last of Us. Granted, you can't really make an argument for The Last of Us, considering that most people started to hate it around the time the new season came out, when it started adapting The Last of Us Part 2, and we all know how that went. But for the other examples that I've provided, it is a clear-cut example of people changing unnecessary things and end up driving away their audiences. Now, let's not get it twisted. I'm all for changes that I feel are necessary that could add to the overall experience of the original. For example, Cypher's character in the animated series is actually competent, and it's a lot better than what we had been given from Konami for the past I don't know how many decades now. However, everything else is just such a downgrade in comparison to what we had before, and the only reason why the animated series was able to get away with so many of what it did was because the original Dracula's Curse had barely any story to begin with, and the story that it did have couldn't realistically be fucked over by the animated series. However, once that original Dracula's Curse story ended, that is when the real problems actually started, with seasons 3 and 4 being debaucherous exits from what we had in seasons 1 and 2. In fact, seasons 3 and 4 were so miraculously awful that all the characters that might have had a goodwill in seasons 1 or 2 were completely botched and humiliated in seasons 3. Not even Isaac, the golden turd in the land of turds, wasn't even safe from the poor writing of season 3 and 4. Because his entire arc after the end of season 2 just ended up being pointless by the time he actually got to Hector, who he was supposed to enact his revenge on. Again, it's funny when writers have to come up with something original instead of coattailing the blueprints of the original source, and yet fail in every fucking place imaginable because their ideas are that dog shit. Speaking of ideas that were taken from the games and implemented poorly, the Infinite Corridor is misused, poorly implemented, and poorly explained. I probably went over this slightly in my Everything Wrong with the Castlevania Animated Series video, but I feel like I need to re-highlight this point again to really showcase why the Infinite Corridor was handled as poorly as it was. Now, allow me to read what the description of the Infinite Corridor is in the original game that it came from. The Infinite Corridor lies in an alternate realm in another dimension which can be accessed from the boss room of the abandoned castle. In the later part of the game, the plane appears as multiple platforms and walkways floating in a void. It is here where Dullahan is encountered. Now, let's read what this fucking Timeline's version of Saint Germain has to say about the Infinite Corridor. The Infinite Corridor is a route to many other worlds, and it's certainly possible that one of them is Hell. However, in the experience of those of my particular expertise, it is in fact a system of doors to other lands, separated from our own by space and time. Portals to the corridor are few and far between, and they drift in and out of existence. Does anyone want to take a gander as to what the fuck is the problem? Oh, I can simply tell you. It's because they use the concepts of the time rift from Castlevania Judgment, where it brought many different fighters and places from different spaces and times together in a singular plane, and calls it the Infinite Corridor, where it is literally just that. A fucking corridor. Now, allow me to preface this and say that the reason why I'm so flippant about this is because the Infinite Corridor was never meant to travel between space and time. It was just an alternate realm that basically just had random shit in it and just served as like a void, whose entire goal and purpose was to ensure that it would be as difficult to resurrect Dracula and his castle as much as humanly possible, which is why it had safeguards such as the whole blood ritual Trevor had to do in order to get Hector even into the Infinite Corridor, and then having to defeat Dullahan, who is no fucking slouch in Curse of Darkness, and once you defeat him, the seal that originally kept the castle from summoning again gets broken, and then we see the castle arise from the ocean's waves. Now, I know, to anime-onlys, this sounds pedantic as fuck, and it screams of like why are you caring about something so minimal? Because if they're willing to change the most minimal things about a character, then I have every right to complain about it. If they have the right to change Isaac's character from being how it was in Curse of Darkness to being how it is in the animated series, then I feel like, as a fan of the series, a fan who is deeply impacted by whether or not the quality of the series tanks or goes up, I feel like I would have just as much of a right to complain about this as much as the people who are making the fucking creative decisions behind this show feel like changing Isaac's race was no big deal. However, let's get to the final thing that I have to say here before, I guess, redirecting everyone to go watch my fucking Everything Wrong with Castlevania the Animated Series. Fans of the animated series have no stake in what happens to the OG series. You'd be hard-pressed to find a substantial majority of the people who watch the anime play any of the games the series is based on. Sure, you will have a few small sect of those who interact with a game or two, like Castlevania 1 or Symphony of the Night, but even rarer is to find someone play a large portion of the Castlevania catalog. There was no substantial amounts of celebration from their front when there is a Castlevania crossover of any kind, like with Vampire Survivors, Dead by Daylight, V-Rising, and so many others. As well as the fact that there was no particular fanfare coming from their side of the fence when games such as the Dominus or Advanced collections came out. The only people who were ecstatic about these releases were the people who stuck by the series from thick and thin. If Konami were to listen to the Netflix animated series fans, they will be making content for people who won't buy it, which is why it is integral and important to call out the narrative that the animated series is as great as people say it is, because the unfortunate reality of the matter is that it's not. It never has been good, and it never will be good. For as long as we get people like Adi Shankar and Warren Ellis in seats of creative power over franchises such as Devil May Cry or Castlevania, we will never get a truly good adaptation of franchises like Castlevania, franchises that have not seen a proper game that complemented the original story's work in almost 2 decades. Sure, you can say that Konami made games like Lords of Shadow 1 and Lords of Shadow 2. However, those Castlevania games did not capture any spirit of what made the original so memorable and iconic. And then we have games like Grimoire of Souls, which I desperately want to label it a mainline Castlevania game because it captures the spirit of what made the original Castlevania timeline so good. However, the problem is that it's on Apple Arcade, and nobody has fucking played it at all. So it's hard to even tell if this game even speaks canon to the original timeline. However, moot points aside, I think you can finally understand now, or hopefully you finally understood, why I feel like it is such an attack towards the Castlevania franchise when people like this push the narrative that the Castlevania animated series was beyond heavenly divine goodness, when it wasn't. And I'll have you know, for the people saying that I should have just accepted the animated series because we weren't gonna get any more Castlevania content and that we were starving for Castlevania content at the time, keep in mind, it's thought processes like these that lead to such disastrous projects such as Castlevania Nocturne, where the entire thing felt like a gross fanfiction. However, I've said my piece. Hopefully I won't have to say my piece ever again. However, before I can conclude this video, allow me to share with you something that happened during the production of this video. So, whilst I was figuring a way to make a batch release of my content, I got 2 comments from the same individual on the same video, accusing me of 2 things. Now, this person was Unholy Grail YT. Now, before you even think of anything, I don't recommend going after this person on an individual basis, because just based on looking at the comments that I'm providing, it's clear that argumentation is not the strong suit. So it's best to just ignore the person and look what they wrote. And what they wrote was the same common thing that every person who doesn't have an argument uses every fucking time against somebody like myself. And that is to call you an ad hominem or something that you plain aren't. Now, to address these two comments, I have 2 points to make. Number 1. I'm a vampire and I hate humans. Why the fuck would I care about your color or what preference you go by? Secondly, their argumentation can easily be dismantled by one simple question. For Isaac specifically, why are you accusing me of racism for any comment I've made about Isaac, even though I've stated multiple times in multiple videos that I believe that Isaac is one of the best things to come out of the original series? Once again, this could be like an Isaac situation where the character within, like, himself, like if we were to split Isaac from the anime and Isaac from the games, and say that they're, like, completely different people, and, like, completely different, like, backstories and everything, then sure, Isaac from the anime can, like, withstand on his own.
The only character that I can say for certain has gradually progressed from how they started to where they ended up in the show is none other than his counterpart, Isaac. Now, we can formally begin rambling about Isaac. Now, before I even start, allow me to preface this. I love Isaac's character in the show. I think that he's wonderfully written, either because he's genuinely a good character or because all the characters that are around him are just that fucking bad when it comes to the story. Regardless of that though, it doesn't change the fact that Isaac is one of the best characters to come out of the show.
In conclusion, this probably only got brought up because I was talking about Annette's race swapping or I was talking about Isaac's race swapping, which I admitted in the video was not a bad race swap. I just said that I missed the old Isaac that we had back in the game.
I feared that we would have another Isaac situation, where one of the characters would be needlessly race swapped for no other reason, just to have a token character. However, I will concede to this and say that in Isaac's case, he was a well-written character, even if his entire story and his design were completely changed.
Even though I disagree heavily that he should have been race swapped, because frankly, I believe he shouldn't have been. Wanna know why? Because I believe black people are worth their dignity in understanding that they do not deserve handouts. They deserve more. They deserve their own original characters, and with their own original stories, not hand-me-downs. But God forbid you be so tolerant in understanding that you believe that the way Isaac was depicted, and even the way Annette was depicted in Nocturne, is good enough for black people. Because you believe that hand-me-downs should be given to black people because they're not deserving of their own characters. That's what I'm hearing when every time someone makes this stupid argument. Now, for the homophobia. That is the funniest accusation anyone can make, considering, you know, what I am. The only people who accuse me of homophobia are people who are not viewers of the channel or have any idea of what the fuck I am. So I'm simply going to laugh this off as, you know, being ignorant to facts. But the rest of the comment, because, you know, it was cut off before I deleted it, you can tell that they were going to use the argument about Alucard sleeping with the 2 Asian characters in Season 3. And if you've watched Season 3, you can understand that there is no defending this. In what reality is Alucard doing anything with anyone acceptable, when his literal character is if you put him in a room with 1,000 women, he wouldn't touch one. If you put him in a room with 1,000 men who were trying to attract his attention, he wouldn't be attracted. Why? Because he understands the frailty of humanity, which is why he wants to defend it. I don't care what your excuse is for why Alucard had to do that specific thing in Season 3. The point being is that that's not Alucard and that's not how he acts. It literally could have been done with any other character and it wouldn't have been a problem, but you chose to do it with a character who is not known for this. Could you imagine if the reason why Dracula went to war with humanity was because of the same situation that Alucard had put himself in? Yeah, that wouldn't be a good idea now, would it? But yeah, I feel like I need to say this because people like this aren't here for healthy debate, or they're not here for the long conversation. They're only here to take in short jabs and call you whatever obscenity they want so that they can feel better about themselves. So if you find people like this in your real life, just understand that most of the time they're media illiterate, and they don't really understand what the fuck they're talking about. Doesn't mean they can't be wrong in their opinion though, they can keep their fucking opinion. Just understand, it's fucking wrong.
Before I sign off, I want to make it expedantly clear
that I am not trying to attack I'm Kevin. All I'm saying is that I just do not agree. And the funny part is that I can't even say that because he didn't offer any claim of substantiability in his video to begin with. All the entire video was a fucking plot synopsis of Castlevania Seasons 1 and 2. In fact, the only piece of opinion in the video that I could see was the small letters at the very bottom of the screen near the end of the video where he said it was heat, and never described why. So, in reality, I was arguing nothing. The only thing I was arguing was his title, and that was it! Along with the fact that I answered a few of his questions that he posed in the video, so I guess it really wasn't for nothing if he does end up watching this. Unfortunately though, there is always the thought that I couldn't convince everyone, and that is a damn bloody shame. But I do hope that everything I spoke to wasn't heard with deaf ears. My name is Sir Valentine, and make sure to keep things civil, and stay cherryful.